Hey everybody, how is it going today? My name is Ian, and today we're talking about Lynn Humphrey's Traditional Foods, Traditional Values, or rather as the title should technically be, Traditional Foods, Traditional Values. I really like this reading. I like it because it's based in a classroom exercise, so I find it useful for teaching, and it's the university context, so it's useful to communicate to students. But basically, the article itself is this effort at trying to understand what students think of as the concept of tradition. Excuse me, I gotta preheat my little oven here. What students understand is the concept of tradition. And it's at the tail end of an introductory folklore course. So what she has done is she has a potluck, which would be nice. Potluck at the end of every semester. And basically she asks the students to bring a traditional food. And she leaves it at that. Now, it's not necessarily clear in the article whether she has asked this and over the years she has realized that this very concept of tradition is ambiguous and therefore she explores it further, or whether this is all a setup at the very beginning and that she's like, aha, traditional food, this will be my last teaching moment. And actually it doesn't really matter, but it's an interesting thing. Today, while I'm doing this, I'm going to be making the shortcake recipe from page 165. So I need 2 cups of flour, apparently. You should know that I am not a particularly good baker. And this recipe implies that you know how to bake. So we're just going to see how this goes. I might not have time to actually cook it in the course of making the video, but I will follow up with a close-up of the finished product. So that's 2 cups of flour. 1 dessert spoonful, a big heaping dessert spoonful of shortening. What do you think comprises big heaping dessert spoon? That about right? Aha, let's see there. Okay. Ugh. A level teaspoon of salt. Let's see, you got me old teaspoon things. 1 teaspoon. So what she discovered when she was doing this is 2 teaspoons of baking powder, not level, just a little bit more. What she discovered she was doing this was that there were various meanings of the word tradition. And that really the only criteria for naming something as traditional is either the assurances of the consumer or the assurances of the cook that this is a traditional thing. And so within the moment of performance, and we want to think of things, food events as performances, the way the folklorists would understand them, where basically from a assumed, not necessarily finite, not necessarily static, not necessarily even itemizable repertoire that is of the maker's, in the maker's background, is all of that is brought to bear, or from that is selected one particular thing that is going to be introduced into some kind of occasion. We could be thinking of that in terms of a story, and that of all the possible stories this teller knows, they're telling this story at this particular time. And they're going to be basing it on their own sense, their own sense of the importance of the story at any given moment, their own sense of the audience. And they're going to be conforming it to the audience's expectations in the specific contexts. And the same is true for a story as is true for a recipe. I need milk. I Forgot to get the milk out before I started filming. 1 cup of milk and about 1/4. That's 1 cup. And about 1/4. Sure? That look good to you? Ugh. I probably shouldn't go ugh each and every time. Oh, and about this much sugar. This much sugar is measured by like a palm of a hand. They say about 1 tablespoon. I'm going to do it by the palm of the hand. I'm going to do. I presume that I have hands larger than this person's mother-in-law, just because I'm a big hulking dude. So do a slightly less than a palm. What do you think of that? Yeah, it's probably about a tablespoon. We'll see. Oh, wonderful. And I'm already filthy. So, once you have this expectation, this performance, you are bringing these food moments together. And so for any food event, it is the meeting of the maker or makers and the meeting of the consumer. Of course, the maker is going to be a consumer as well, most of the time. And the event is framed. And once you frame the event as traditional, as is the case here, where it's like, please bring an example of a traditional food, and then leave it wide open, that's going to set the expectations just ever so slightly differently. It's like, oh, I'm bringing this. And so it's the name of this particular performance. And one of the things that she notices most is that food is narratively framed. That it is, there's often a context or an apology that happens at the end. Ooh, this is nice and thick already. That sort of locates it within a specific moment. And I like her idea of the apology. It's like, well, this thing, especially if it's a food that someone might find potentially embarrassing because of class reasons or because of the ingredients that are required. Again, I just put shortening in here. I could have put lard in here. And if there's now in a health conscious society that is as much about class as it is about actual health, there might be some kind of potential negative connotation to this. This looks really thick. I don't know. Oh, I don't know how to do this, but we're going to see. So one of the things that's typically consistent are the claims that this is being handed down, or only one particular member of the family will fix it, or it's for a particular special occasion, or it involves some kind of secret ingredient or local ingredient, or that it has associations with high holidays. And of course, it is at moments of holidays when often we will resort either to recipes that require more time, because we are marking the specialness of the occasion by indicating the specialness of the effort required to go into making something. Oh boy, I did not come prepared for this amount of work. Or conversely, that is what they might call a rite of intensification, where the group is really hammering down on its sense of cohesion, its sense of belongingness together, and therefore it brings out the foods that are marked as having to be there, that there's a necessity for them to be there. So then she took these recipes over the years, and or dishes. She uses the word dish more than recipe, and she categorized it into 4 different categories. And she's not creating a typology per se. She's really just trying to disentangle some of these meanings. Now, it doesn't mean that they're bad categories by any stretch of the imagination. They're quite useful, but she's not expecting them to be held up to some kind of absolute scientific scrutiny. So, because there is going to be overlap. She is trying to, it's one of the things that happens when we talk about vernacular culture, in that sometimes the typology is different because things have multiple meanings and multiple uses and polyvalences. And we're talking about how these things are understood, and these things can be understood by the same person differently depending on different contexts. Now, I'm supposed to bake in medium oven, and you can tell when it's done. I've set the oven for 350. I have no idea what shortcake should be made in, so I'm just going to put it in one of these little pans here. And I do know that I should probably grease it up a little bit. I'm going to use shortening just because it happens to be here. Should I use shortening and flour? Ugh. Let me put this... Again, I should probably stop going, ugh. That's my microphone cable. Pay it no heed. So I'll just go do this. So she has these 4 categories. Traditional family recipes, where they're basically, they have the name traditional associated with them. Traditional holidays and special occasion recipes. Miscellaneous, where there's no rationale given for them. Oh, and I skipped one. Traditional non-family social recipes. It's really difficult to read one's notes while also greasing up a plate. And now it's also difficult to turn the page while greasing up a plate. So traditional family recipes. They can go from anywhere from the, I think it's like a 1 sentence, my grandma used to put violet leaves in her salads, to enchiladas a la drunk, an elaborate story. That's nicely greased up. An elaborate story of a particular family tradition. Boy, did I not think this through. So I will add a little bit of flour to this. I seem to remember I used to make banana bread, which was from an old grandma's style cookbook. It was the cookbook from the, what was it? It was the Catholic Church in Miramichi. Maybe Chatham, perhaps. Yeah, Chatham. And one of those are fundraiser cookbooks that you should all have multiple copies of because they're kind of awesome. So Little Old Lady's, it was a Little Old Lady, her recipe for banana bread, which was my default and still is. I have that cookbook around here somewhere. So all the recipes, almost all the recipes from these were from either mothers or mother-in-laws. And the only sort of rationale for them being traditional was really the sort of the origin of the recipe from an old woman or from a matriarch of some description in the family. And she has this wonderful quote: as a medium for social and cognitive expression, the dish provides a special family connection in the memory of the informant. The power of tradition does not lie in the degree of difficulty of preparing the dish, but its connotations. So really, in many ways, it's the recipe that reminds one of one's primary, or one's husband's primary food provider from youth. So there's a nostalgic aspect to it. It is not necessarily like a cultural food. She has that other recipe in this particular example, which I was actually going to use until I realized that I don't think cream of asparagus soup is available in Canada, or cans of asparagus in the same way that it would have been at this time. So I'm just pressing this in. Does that look right to you? Yeah, you don't know. You're not answering. I pop it in. Here we go. Okay. I think that more or less works. Hooray. Okay. So now I'm going to pop this in the oven and see what goes there. Okay, so let's see how this works. Pop that in. And so she talks later on about how she makes this wonderful connotation, this wonderful example, that recipes are similar to proverbs, in that proverbs are these sort of units of wisdom that inhabit a culture, but most of the time they're given from, they are They're vertical, they're not horizontal. They come from authority figures, typically elders or parents or someone with some kind of higher status, and they work down. They're not sort of spread across horizontally. And recipes can function the same way. Certainly, perhaps the prized recipes in that way. Of course, we'll share recipes back and forth, but maybe that's also a modern connotation as cooking has become a hobby. In terms of food being both much more an act of labor, but also an act of domestic labor and a way of demonstrating maternal care, a way of demonstrating femininity and all the gender that's associated with it. These recipes sort of tend to come down from top to bottom, as it were. Then there's also like the second category, the traditional holiday and special occasion recipes. These emphasize the specialness of the day itself, so recipes that are only ever made on a particular day, or only sort of particular times of year. But one of the things that it's done one of the things that sort of demonstrates is, as a point I've already made, is that on special times of year, it isn't necessarily the complexity, although, I earlier had said that sometimes there's big things that are elaborate that you only really want to do for these special occasions. But the other hand is that they might just be overlooked. They are too simple, but they still have that connotation. And so they're something that is kept up. That emerges on particular occasions when you want to enact that simplicity. So whether it's too complicated or too simple, there's something that nevertheless harkens back to this sort of sense of nostalgia. And holidays do that. Holidays, at the very least, one of the things we think about in terms of calendar customs is that they connect us to previous iterations of those calendar customs. So the meal that you have at Thanksgiving is going to be similar to the meal that you as a family celebrated the year before, and the year before that, and the year before that. And so even though that context is going to change, there's that sort of reperformance of fluidity. And that context will change by people dying and people being born, and the family as a constituent of its individual members is going to change, but the family as an idea and the sense of sort of the solidarity of that family, that is consistent from year to year. That's the through line, and one of the ways of emphasizing the through line is by emphasizing the special foods that are served on those days. The third category, is traditional non-family social recipes. And these are the ones that students would often bring in. It's like, this is a traditional food from X. And those are the foods, again, this is the university context, those are the foods that had been introduced to them by someone else. Now, often that someone else is situationally someone that they consider ethnic, other. And so traditional is something that maybe other people have. It's not that they don't recognize that they have their own traditions, but in this particular instance, it's the recognizing it that someone else has this. Sometimes the food can have negative connotations as well. But what's really kind of key is that food, then it becomes evident that food is a way of intercultural exchange of its perhaps sort of easiest form. That there are other aspects of culture that are difficult to communicate. Things like story, certainly if language is an issue. Things like song, no one really likes hearing songs. But food is something okay, I can now be immersed in your culture ever so briefly. You can be immersed in mine, and we can do this on this level of exchange. And that's actually one of the ways that food becomes a valuable tool in tourism. In that you can sort of, it's a quick immersive, because it is done with the senses. It's a quick and immersive way into a sensory experience of somewhere else, where if it required cognitive aspects like understanding language, you might not be able to necessarily do it. And there's sometimes a distance between the person who brought this food to the potluck, or brought the idea of this food to the potluck, and the food themselves, and that, to the point where they might not have ever even had it. But she also notes that the sort of the power that is present in initiating someone else with food, and food as a role in initiation, not necessarily sort of a Froschweek type of horrific initiations and hazing, although it's interesting how food plays a role in that, but even sort of more celebratory ones. I have an article out there on Cape Breton Foodways, and one of the things is one of the things I cover in that is work that was actually done by a student, and it's the use of lobster in a home. Obviously, lobster is redolent in Cape Breton and Atlantic Canada general foodways, but this was done in the home, and it was people who were entering into the family. They had married in, but they were from Ontario and Quebec, two different people. They were from away. They came, and we're going to have an authentic lobster supper. One of them had lobster, but only in restaurants. The other one had never had lobster, and it was a sort of great. It was a performance. It was staged. It was there were tricks. There was fun. There was the sort of use of butter and sort of the drawing in of people with and all the sort of almost inherently pristine, non-couth ways of eating that I think is actually a performance of Eastern identity at this particular moment. And after that, they had the meal, and they were sort of now officially members of the family. So it's so initiation, in all senses of the word, simply as an introduction, but also as a now you are one of us. The role that food plays there is kind of neat. And then there is this fourth category, the no rationale given traditional recipe. So basically, what is a traditional recipe? And someone just goes, well, here's one, without any context, without any issue of how the recipe might relate to the informant, whether this is their tradition, whether this is just something they found off in '89. It wouldn't be the internet, but the virtual equivalent of the internet, sort of a guessing game. But even just by bringing it in, it does suggest something, that this is a category of food that is touched with some kind of connotation for that individual as being having some kind of traditionality to it, which is incredibly vague, but it's an interesting place to begin. Because, as we said, these are food performances, and once you have the performance, it frames the event in a particular way. So, okay, now let's dig deep. What is this person thinking? You could describe it to simply sloppy collecting, but this person has clearly brought this as an example. Why? Does it relate to the other three categories somehow? Does it fit in? We don't know, but at the very least, we now have this interesting list of anonymous, decontextualized foods. The only thing that we know about them is that sometime, somewhere, one person in Southern California considered them traditional. So what strikes me about this is that this is less an article about food and more a way of using food to explore this concept of tradition, this concept of the semi-permanence and the semi-enshrined with meaning and value connotation that tradition has. The word tradition has, or the adjectival traditional has. So whether you want to go into this as a Foodways article or whether you want to go into this as a rumination on the concept of tradition, this is that nice Venn diagram where they overlap. And it's an interesting thing. So as a thought experiment, if you had to identify a traditional food, first start with the foods themselves. Just write down a list of like 5 or 6 traditional foods. And then, okay, well, why do I think this? Do I think this because I've been told it's traditional food? Am I of a community that has been historically marginalized, disenfranchised, and so the very word traditional has a heavy connotation of something that desperately needs to be preserved, and so we'll look to older food forms and something that almost has like the level of sacred associated with them, whether or not we care about those foods at all, whether or not we actually enjoy those foods. Or is it a familial thing? Or is it, again, someone else's? Whatever. That's an interesting thought experiment. And so, with that, I am going to go. So this has been Lynn Humphrey's Traditional Foods, Traditional Values. I'm Ian. I bid you well. And my shortcake. Shortcake is not ready yet, but I will film it when it is. And I'll see what kind of editing magic I can do. Goodbye. So I got terrified and went to the internet. It's been baking for about 15 minutes and it does not look anywhere near where it should be at this point. And some places were saying, oh, you bake it at 425. Like, oh no, I thought 350. So I'm going to raise it to 425 and see if that does anything. This could be terrible. So another recipe said it was going to be okay at 350. So just got another 5 minutes. Whoa, 5 minutes. And there we have it. Got a nice sort of beginning of a golden brown, but not too late. Too thick. Comes out nice and clean. So I'm going to let it cool, and I'm going to see what happens after. Came out of the pan nicely, very easily. It smells okay. It smells very floury. Like, I don't know if the flour sort of got cooked in. I'm not really sure how this is going to be. Let it cool some more, though. Okay. So it has cooled sufficiently. It is, it's out of the oven. It's off the rack. It's here. You can see it's kind of golden browny. And again, I forgot that this was sort of shortcake and how people eat shortcake. Maybe it should have been done in biscuit form, but I think this is going to more or less work. I'm going to, this might be an unusual way of doing it, but I'm going to cut off a little slice. See how it looks like on the inside. Well, it's done all the way through. Let's see. Oh, yeah. In case I want to share later. Let's make a small piece. It smells floury, but oh yeah, that works. Nice and crumbly. I got the secret. I'm going to put on some butter. See if that improves it. I mean, what doesn't get improved by butter? There we go. Nice big old hunk. Too much butter maybe. But we'll see. Oh yeah. So, kids at home, you can make that shortcake recipe. 22 minutes in a 350 works. Maybe do 18 in a 425. That also works. Look at me, culinary masterpiece. Be well, everybody.